Good morning and welcome to the Daily Cyber Briefing for Thursday, the 31st of July. I'm Stephen Ridgway. There is a 0-day remote code execution vulnerability in CrushFTP. Full technical details and a proof of concept have now been published and are available to would-be attackers. There are patches available, so if you are using CrushFTP, very strongly recommend that you take a look at this and you apply the patches at your earliest opportunity. The CVE is CVE 2025-54309. It's got a CVSS score of 9.8, which is pretty serious. It affects CrushFTP version 10 prior to 10.8.5 and version 11 prior to 11.3.4_23. So if you are using earlier versions of either Crush 10 or Crush FTP 10 or Crush FTP 11, very much recommend that you have a look at the article, risk assess what's going on in your environment, and apply the patch at your earliest possible convenience, because this stuff is almost definitely being exploited in the wild now, although it hasn't hit the news that much from an exploit perspective. But because proof concepts out there, it will not be long before every Tom, Dick and Harry is having a go at you. Oh, excuse me. Polleny today. Right, researchers have released a decryptor for FunkSec ransomware. So FunkSec is a piece of ransomware that has been around. It's a group, I suppose, with associated malware that's been around since December last year. Been active since December last year, probably a little bit before that. Their leak site lists 113 victims, but that may be in fact, it's almost definitely an underestimate of the number of organisations that have been hit with this, as not everybody declares what's going on, and they will not be necessarily publishing details of everybody that they've extorted. So if you are, or if you have been hit by FunkSec, it is worth having a read of this article. Because you may be able to recover your data via the free decryptor. Now, bear in mind, there's nothing to say, there's no reason to believe that the data that you recover is in a reasonable state. So although free decryptors are certainly better than paying a ransom, there is absolutely no reason to have faith in the quality or the integrity of the data that you recover in that way. Same goes for paying a ransom and getting the decryption key or whatever it is. You don't know what's happened to that data whilst it's not been under your control, i.e. they had access to it. So it also, you don't know, they will have exfiltrated your data. Paying up, by the way, is no guarantee that your data won't be leaked, for two reasons. One is they're criminals. Why would you believe that they're going to do what they say they're going to do? And secondly, they're criminals. They work in a world full of other criminals. What's to say that some other group won't simply lift your data off this group? They could either sell it on, or they could just be hacked themselves, and that stuff leaked. So think carefully when you're risk assessing the approach to this stuff. Far better to make an assumption that the data will leak, even if it hasn't leaked yet, and begin to put in place mitigations to the impact of that data leak. And if you need to restore systems, restore from known good backups. Don't restore from things which have been compromised by somebody you don't trust. And then finally, an article I came across in the Register, which it's an interesting article, perhaps because of the nuance of what they're trying to say here. But it's talking about the security of internet exchange points. One of the I've just got to find the phrase in the article. But basically, it talks about whether they're actually looking at it from a government regulation, an international regulation perspective. Are we taking enough care of those points where networks peer? Now, interestingly, I kind of thought everybody knew this stuff, but just in case you don't know, thinking at it from at a very simple level, your internet connectivity is provided by a particular provider. Okay, now you may buy that service off whoever it may be, and it then runs over particular sets of cables. The cables are owned in Britain. There's a fair chance it's owned by Openreach, BT. How does your data get off, let's say, BT's network and find services which are on Orange network in France? Okay. Now, around the world, then, there are peering points, and there aren't that many of them, to be honest, but they are they're actually supported by the individual telcos themselves. They're often private-owned data centers. The costs are spread across all the telcos that peer in there. They don't charge each other for peering because actually, basically, the internet would stop working if you did that. You would be in a little pool of networks with an inability to get anywhere else. The article kind of implies that this stuff is not secured. My experience of this is actually they are pretty well secured. They're certainly physically very well secured, the ones that I've seen. There are at least one in London that I know or I knew of. I don't know what it's like now, but it's going back a few years. But one in London that was very well secured. Amsterdam, I think, has got a big internet exchange peering point. So they are definitely critical to the functioning of the global internet. The question that I've got is, should we, and there's a question out to the community really, should we be pushing governments to interfere in this, or are we better off actually allowing the telcos to manage the security of these peering points on their own? My gut feeling is whenever you get regulators, national or international, or especially if you're going to get the supranational global regulators involved in things, it ends up as a complete shit show. The regulations that come out are either unworkable or generally very expensive to implement and mostly don't seem to actually address the issues that they think they address. So just as an interesting, as a point. Now, why does this matter to most of us? Well, there's two sides of it. One is we need to be involved in these discussions because, quite frankly, anyone listening to this briefing has got 1,000, if not 100,000 times the knowledge of how all this stuff hangs together and how to secure it than anybody who is going to be discussing this at a governmental or intergovernmental level. And the other one is have you built this into your built in this particular arena as part of your risk assessment for connectivity? So think of it like this: if you don't know where your particular internet provider's peering points are, okay, you don't necessarily know how resilient your access to the internet would be. So definitely worth having a think about, well, where are the services that you care about, and what's the network path to get there? And don't just say it goes from here to an exchange, and from the exchange it goes to the internet. And it doesn't. It goes to the exchange, and the exchange then goes to somewhere to somewhere to somewhere else, blah, blah, blah. Now, so look at it like this, right? If you've got services running in AWS and you've done nothing else, your AWS services are probably running in the States. Just as an example, it could be Google or Azure or whatever it might be. But we'll take AWS as an example. Now, if you're in the UK and your servers are in a data center physically in the US, you have to get the network traffic from the UK to the US. If you are, let's say, on BT, have you asked where does the connectivity go from where you physically are through to some transatlantic cables that go all the way back over to the US, where Amazon has its data centers? If you don't know where those traffic flows are, you're just crossing your fingers and hoping that if something goes wrong, you will be able to. Their systems will be able to carry your traffic. I've looked at this in the past from the point of view of undersea cables. What happens if an undersea cable gets cut? Used to be generally, whoops, somebody trawled one up. These days, it's much more likely to be, whoops, the Russians have sent a sub and cut the cables. So there aren't that many of them. Okay, so we're getting down to this whole arena of how do you understand resilience in your connectivity, where there are a relatively small number of potential points of failure. Now, I appreciate you can only really design for to eliminate single points of failure. By the time you're trying to get into addressing multiple points of failure, the options, the complexity it increases exponentially. Probably, actually, it's genuinely exponential. So it is something to think about. But yeah, we're kind of all aware of the fact that there are only a couple of cables that go across the north of the Atlantic, and there might be more now, but there only used to be a couple of cables that did the north and south routes across the north of the Atlantic, and then you've got so many cables that went south, and you've got a few that went across here, there, and whatever. So if the cables got cut, firstly, does your provider have a peering agreement that allows them to use another cable, send the traffic over another cable? And does that other cable have capacity? Certainly going north-south, going down the west side of Africa for many, many, many years, there was zero capacity. So anything that was in a cable that went down towards South Africa would get stuck halfway down because it was only one or two cables and they were full. So there was no possibility if one of them got damaged for that traffic to successfully fail over onto another cable because there was no bandwidth available for it. So here we go. We're into this whole arena of, well, we kind of get it from the point of view of how does traffic move around the world? But take it one step further back. How does my traffic get off my provider's network and get onto somebody else's network? Because let's use the example of undersea cables again. They're not owned by BT, or they're not fully owned by BT. They tend to be owned by either specific undersea cable companies or cable companies that are owned by a consortium of other telcos. So you need to hit a peering point in order to get onto one of those cables, which takes us back to, do you know where your data goes? If you've built in a whole load of resilience, a good example, like we're a working from home first company. And the reason for that is twofold. One is it gives us access to the best talent in the whole of the UK. We don't care where people live. We just want to get the best people. That's fine. It also provides us with geographic resilience. So a regional disaster won't create a company-wide disaster for TSC. Okay. Now that's kind of good because then, all right, we are then, people's internet connections are then spread across the whole of the UK. And we've got plenty of people that if somebody's system is down, somebody else can take over that work temporarily whilst it all gets brought back up again. Now, can we hand on heart say we know that this traffic doesn't all end up in an internet peering point in London? I think actually genuinely we don't know the answer to that, and perhaps it's something that we ought to have another think about. What we do know is that we know where our data centers are. We know where we know where our data centers are. We know where our the cloud providers data center, where we use cloud services. We know where the cloud services are hosted, and we know that there are multiple paths to get to them. What goes on beyond that, of course, is it kind of gets too difficult to delve into. So we've thought about it. I don't think we're perfect in our risk assessment of this stuff, but I'm well aware of the fact that most organizations have done zero in the way of risk assessment for these things anyway. So there you go. Have a think about this stuff. All triggered by an article, which the article, by the way, says governments should get involved in securing internet peering points, and we need to decentralize it and move away from having these large peering points in a few places around the world and have lots of little peering points. Yeah, that's really going to make it easy to secure, isn't it? So I don't particularly agree with. I agree with let's look into it, and agree with the sentiment of we're probably ignoring it. Oh, by the way, the one phrase I now have found my, you know how humans have this desire to be put into a category. They all say they don't, but they really do want to, belong to a tribe. I found my tribe. To quote from the article, most internet exchange points are privately operated and their existence and role isn't widely known beyond a small community of internetworking wonks. Well, that means I am clearly an internetworking wonker. And on that point, I shall draw this to a close. Hope you have a good Thursday. I'll speak to you all again.